There is a single stone in Jerusalem that weighs more than a modern crane can lift. Not a wall, not a building, one stone. It is longer than a city bus. It is taller than a grown man with his arms raised, and depending on how deep it runs into the dark, which even now we cannot fully measure, it weighs somewhere between 300 and 600 tons. It was cut, moved, lifted, and set into place with a precision so fine you cannot slide a knife blade into the joint. 2,000 years ago, by hand. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Almost no one who comes to pray at this wall has ever seen that stone. They stand on the other side of it, kissing the surface, weeping, pushing folded notes into the cracks. And the greatest single object their ancestors ever built is hidden in the dark, behind them, underground. By the time we're done here, you'll understand how human beings without a single machine moved a weight we still struggle to move today. But you'll also understand something stranger, something almost no one who visits this place is told. The holiest wall in the world was never meant to be holy at all. It was never part of the temple. It's something else entirely. Let's kill that idea first, because everything depends on it. When people picture the Western Wall, the Kotel, they imagine they're looking at a surviving piece of the great Temple of Jerusalem, a fragment of the sanctuary itself, a holy relic of the house of God. It isn't. It never was. The wall you're picturing never held a prayer, never housed an altar, never saw a priest. It held back dirt. It is a retaining wall, a piece of structural engineering. The single most sacred site in Judaism is, in its origin, a load-bearing foundation. To understand why anyone would build something this colossal just to hold back the ground, you have to meet the man who ordered it. His name was Herod. History remembers him as Herod the Great. He was a client king, ruling Judea on behalf of Rome around 2 decades before the birth of Christ. He was brilliant, paranoid, and monstrously ambitious. He murdered members of his own family out of fear. And he built like almost no one in the ancient world before him. And Herod looked at the most sacred spot of his people, the Temple Mount, the hill where the temple stood, and decided it was too small. So he made a decision that borders on insane. He didn't just renovate the temple, he decided to enlarge the entire mountain it sat on. The natural hilltop wasn't broad enough for the vast plaza he imagined, so Herod's engineers did something staggering. They built an artificial mountain around the real one. They threw up enormous walls on all 4 sides, a giant rectangular box, and then filled the space between the walls and the original hill with earth and rubble until they had flattened the whole thing into one immense level platform. Floating above the slopes below, picture the scale. The platform they created covers around 140,000 square meters. That's roughly 20 soccer fields, raised up and made flat by hand on the side of a hill. According to the ancient historian Josephus, the work took an army of around 10,000 laborers. 1,000 priests were specially trained as stonemasons just to work the most sacred sections. Think of that as a payroll. A full-time workforce the size of a small city, employed for a generation. This was one of the most expensive construction projects in the entire ancient world, and the Western Wall, the wall a billion people now revere, is simply one side of that box. The Western retaining wall, the thing holding the dirt in. It runs for nearly 500 meters underground. The little section you see in photographs, the prayer plaza, that's only about a tenth of the whole. The rest is buried, hidden behind the houses of the old city, swallowed by 2,000 years of rubble and rebuilding. Now, here is the engineering problem that gives us our entire story. If you are Herod and you are building a box of earth that has to hold for 1,000 years in a region that suffers earthquakes, your single greatest enemy is movement. The whole structure lives or dies on the bottom courses of the wall, the foundation stones. If they shift, even slightly, the wall bows. If the wall bows, the fill behind it pushes through, and the artificial mountain comes down. So Herod's engineers asked themselves a brutal question. How do you build a foundation that can never, ever move? Their answer was beautiful and terrifying in its simplicity. You make the stones so heavy that nothing in the world can push them. Not an earthquake, not the pressure of a mountain of fill, not an invading army with battering rams. You build with blocks so monstrous that the very weight which makes them impossible to place is exactly what makes them impossible to move. But that creates a new problem, a nightmare of a problem, because now you have to place them. How do you lift a stone that was designed to be unliftable? Hold that question, because the answer is the heart of everything. And we have to go down into the dark to find it. Deep beneath the streets of the modern city run the Western Wall tunnels, a narrow passage that follows the buried length of the wall, course by ancient course, into the black. The air down there is cool and still. It smells of cold limestone and old water. Your hand trails along stone that has not seen the sun in 20 centuries, and then the passage opens, and you are standing in front of it. The stone the builders themselves seem to have treated as the masterpiece. Scholars call it the Western Stone. Let me give you its body. It is around 13.5 meters long, the length of a large bus, end to end. It stands about 3 meters tall, and it runs back into the wall to a depth we genuinely argue about. That argument is why you'll hear different numbers. Older estimates, assuming it ran deep, put its weight as high as 570 tons. A more recent survey using ground-penetrating radar suggested it might be shallower, bringing it down to perhaps 250, 300 tons. And here's what I need you to sit with. That debate doesn't shrink the miracle, because the lowest estimate on the table is still heavier than the strongest cranes we use on construction sites today can lift. Let me make that weight real. 300 tons is roughly 50 African elephants standing on a single slab. Take the high estimate and you're past 100 elephants. You're looking at a single carved block that weighs more than a fully loaded jumbo jet. More than 2 copies of the Statue of Liberty. And it isn't resting on the ground, where you could roll it into place. It sits 12 meters up, built into the wall, high above the ancient street, surrounded by other massive stones, fitted so tightly against its neighbors that the seams are razor thin. So how do you cut something like that in an age with no steel tools, no diesel, no hydraulics? Start at the quarry. The builders found their limestone in beds north of the Temple Mount and, crucially, on higher ground. Remember that. It matters more than anything. To split a block free, they didn't have explosives. They had patience, and they had water. They would chisel a straight channel into the bedrock. then hammer dry wooden wedges down into it and soak them. The wood swells as it drinks, slowly, over hours with a force that is almost impossible to believe. The swelling timber cracks the solid rock along the line the masons chose. The mountain splits exactly where they told it to. Then comes the dressing, and this is where you see the genius in their hands. Look closely at any original Herodian stone, and you'll see a signature, a flat, sunken border chiseled around all four edges, framing a slightly raised center. Masons call it a drafted margin. It isn't just decoration. That recessed frame let them line up stone against stone with incredible accuracy, hiding any tiny imperfection in the seam. It's why, after 2,000 years, the joints between these giants are still so fine. That border is Herod's fingerprint. Wherever you see it in Jerusalem, you are looking at the work of his masons. And now, the impossible part, moving it. This is where that detail about the quarry being uphill becomes everything. The builders almost certainly did not try to lift these monsters. Lifting is the enemy. Lifting is where you die. Instead, they let gravity do the cruel work. The stone was levered onto a bed of rollers and eased agonizingly downhill along a prepared, gently sloping causeway from the high quarry toward the building site. Teams of men and oxen didn't haul it up. They controlled its descent. But the final stretch, easing a 300-ton block sideways and seating it 12 meters up into a wall with a gap you can't fit a coin into, that last move. We still don't fully agree on how they did it. Ramps, levers, counterweights, cranes built of timber and rope, worked by capstans and tread wheels. Every theory works on paper, and every theory strains belief at this scale. That's worth saying plainly. With all our modern engineering, the single hardest thing those ancient crews did, we still can't completely reconstruct. And before anyone whispers it, no, this is not the work of some lost super civilization or visitors from the sky. We can see their quarries. We can see their half-finished blocks. We can see the chisel marks and the wedge holes. This was done by people, which makes it more astonishing, not less. But the real shock isn't how they placed it. It's why they placed it there. Because here's something that makes no obvious sense. You'd expect the biggest, heaviest stones to be at the very bottom, at the foundation, carrying the load. This one isn't. It sits high up the wall. Why haul your single most monstrous block 12 meters into the air when smaller stones would have done the job? The answer is the masterstroke, the thing engineers admire most. The best explanation is that, at this exact point, there was a weakness behind the wall, a cavity, a void, a vault built into the body of the mount. A normal course of stones sitting over an empty space could sag and crack over the centuries. So the builders did something a modern structural engineer would recognize instantly. They spanned the weak point with one continuous, unbreakable mass, a single stone so long and so heavy that it acts like a bridge, carrying the load across the void and transferring it safely to solid rock on either side. It isn't there to be admired. It's there to solve a problem. And that is the twist that changes how you see this entire place. The greatest stone in Jerusalem was never meant to be seen. It wasn't a monument. It wasn't a statement. It was a structural repair, buried inside a wall, designed to disappear into the engineering and quietly hold everything together for 1,000 years. The most awe-inspiring object these people ever made was the one they intended to hide. So we're left with the question I asked you to hold at the start. If this wall is just engineering, if it's a retaining structure, a box of dirt, a foundation that was meant to vanish behind a temple, then how on earth did it become the holiest place a Jew can pray? For that, we have to leave the engineering behind, and we have to watch the whole thing burn. The year is 70 of the Common Era. The Jews have risen in revolt against Rome, and Rome's answer, under the future Emperor Titus, is annihilation. The legions take Jerusalem street by street, and they come for the temple, the great sanctuary. The gold, the marble, the masterpiece at the center of it all is set ablaze and torn apart. Roman soldiers stand on top of the platform and heave the upper stones of the walls over the edge. You can still see where they landed. Archaeologists uncovered the ancient street running along the wall's base. And lying on its crushed paving stones, exactly where they fell, are the great blocks the legionaries threw down. Frozen in place for 2,000 years, the rubble of the end of a world. The temple was gone. The masterpiece was ash. But the box held. The retaining walls, the unglamorous load-bearing engineering that no one was ever supposed to revere, did not fall. The artificial mountain stayed standing, and the western wall stood there in the ruins, holding back the earth long after the holy thing it was built to support had vanished into smoke. And that is when something quietly extraordinary happened. The temple's most sacred chamber, the Holy of Holies, had stood somewhere up on that platform. The Jews were now barred for centuries, even from the city. But this surviving wall, this engineering scaffold, was the closest point on earth they could still reach to where the heart of the temple had been. So they came to the wall, not because it was the temple, but because it was all that was left standing beside it. And they never stopped coming. Through the Roman centuries, when they were allowed into the city just one day a year to mourn. Through Byzantine rule, through Islamic rule, through Crusaders and Ottomans and empires that rose and crumbled, for nearly 2,000 years, in exile, scattered across the whole world, they turned toward this wall. Generation after generation pressed their hands and their foreheads to these stones, so many for so long that the limestone at human height is worn glass smooth, polished by skin and tears across 20 centuries of longing. Into the cracks between Herod's giant blocks, they began to fold small slips of paper, prayers, names, griefs, hopes, pushed into the seams of a retaining wall, and left with God. And I want to be careful and clear here, because this ground is sacred to more than one people. That same platform above the wall holds the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, among the holiest sites in all of Islam. This is a place layered with the devotion of Jews, Muslims, and Christians, claimed and reclaimed across a painful, tangled history. The stones carry all of it at once, but step back and look at the strange, beautiful shape of what happened. Herod built a temple to be remembered forever and a retaining wall to be forgotten. The temple, the glory, the gold, the thing everyone was meant to look at, is gone, burned, thrown down, scattered, and the wall, the foundation, the scaffolding, the part built to hold the weight and disappear, is the thing that survived, the thing a billion people now turn toward. The masterpiece died, and the support beam became the shrine. There's something in that worth carrying out of the tunnels with you. We pour ourselves into the things meant to be seen, the achievement on display, the golden sanctuary at the top of the hill. But the things that actually carry us through time are almost always the quiet ones underneath. The unglamorous structures holding up a life, the routines, the people, the foundations no one ever applauds, the retaining walls. We build the temple and we worship it, but it's the wall that lasts. So if this changed the way you see those famous stones, if you'll never look at that wall again and think you're only seeing a relic instead of the single greatest hidden feat of engineering in the ancient world, then take 1 second to like this video and subscribe, so the next door we open in time finds you already standing there in the dark with me. But before you go, I have a question, and I genuinely want your answer down in the comments. Herod's wall was the invisible thing that turned out to be holding up everything. So what's the retaining wall in your life? The quiet, unglamorous thing, the person, the habit, the foundation that holds your whole world up and that you almost never stop to thank? Tell me. I'll be reading.